I'm speaking today with Professor Paul Bracher, a member of the Department of Chemistry at St. Louis University. Paul is known to many in the chemistry community as a longtime commentator and investigative journalist on his blog ChemBark. His posts were the frequent topic of conversation at graduate student lounges around the world for students who are doing their training in the mid to late aughts and early teens. I first met Paul in 2005 when he was assigned as my rotation mentor in George Whiteside's group. I ended up joining the Whiteside's group in no small part because of the opportunity to work more closely with Paul and the subgroup working on the chemical origin of life. While our research interests diverged fairly substantially, we did maintain close physical proximity, seeing as how we sat back to back 6 inches apart in the same bay for about 3.5 years. So what I would like to do is ask you to describe your current position, research topic, and teaching activities.
Yep, well, thanks for the invitation first. Yeah, I'm an assistant professor at St. Louis University. I have a research lab that's dedicated to the chemical origins of life. Specifically, we're really interested in the role that potassium might have played in the origin of life. All cells on Earth enrich potassium, and when you have something that's a universal feature like that, you start thinking that it either evolved really, really early or it was there at life's origins. So the question is, why, of all the alkali metals to choose from, did cells insist on having potassium? So we look at roles that potassium might have played with peptides and their formation, and we're kind of branching out to look at other organic reactions and roles for potassium in that too. A lot of people, it kind of blows their mind a little bit. They think that potassium is just a spectator ion, you never, when you're drawing an organic mechanism, you never draw arrows to potassium cations. But we're finding that there are significant differences for reactions when you run them in the presence of potassium versus like an alternative like sodium.
Do you have a favorite hypothesis now for why potassium, not sodium?
I don't I'm not one of those people who comes up with an idea and then just kind of beats the drum for it. I think we're still in the phase where we're generating ideas and we're going to see where the data lead us. So I think that one thing that, if you want to force me into a corner, I think that one thing that potassium could be very important for is the retention of water. We find a lot of salts, especially salts of biologically relevant anions, that retain water better when you have potassium present than when you had sodium present. So maybe when membranes were more leaky and things dried out, or maybe even before membranes were around, potassium might offer an ability to retain water so that you have a solvent, and whatever you're looking for, life here, life somewhere else, you have to imagine that solvents are incredibly important because of, in the solid phase, rates are so slow because of things can't diffuse, and in the gas phase, reactions are so slow because of the molecules are so far apart, they don't collide that often. Like, solvents are really important for maintaining a limited volume, but still permitting diffusion to happen. Yeah.
Okay, great. So regarding your research, about 15 years ago when we met, you posed a question to me that could be applied to any research topic, and that any research topic should be able to address the question of, one, why is it interesting, and two, what is the best possible outcome? So I'm going to turn this around on you.
Okay, I think that's one of the more easy questions to answer as far as the origin of life concerned, is that I think if the origin of life, or potential origins of life, if you don't believe that we're going to be able to find however life originated exactly, those are fascinating questions. They really get down to not just scientific questions, but it transcends science and it enters like it has social implications. Why are we here? Literally, why are we here? What are the chemical processes that led to life developing? And I think that if you could develop a fundamental understanding of those, who knows the possibilities that might come from that. For instance, if we figure out why life has potassium, which really, I don't want to say no one has any idea, but there's really no concrete concept of or understanding of why we have that. Who knows what that's going to lead to in terms of disease? Like, are we going to start understanding diseases where there are potassium differences now? I mean, potassium measurements are part of a Chem 7 panel when you're doing blood work. What are we going to be able to do more with that? Treatments, that's out of my purview, but I think that, we're really trying to get to that hard understanding of that. And I personally love this problem because of which came from George. George was who picked it up. It's unclear where he picked it up. He went somewhere, and all of a sudden he came back to the lab and posed this question to the group: is why does life enrich potassium? That's where it came from for me. That was the first time I heard it, and I'd never dreamed of going to grad school to kind of look at problems associated with that.
So that's the first part of the question. So I would agree that this is possibly the most important scientific problem in terms of why is it interesting. But the best possible outcome is a little bit perhaps more ambiguous. So for example, if you come up with an answer, or the field of the chemical origin of life comes up with a self-replicating, energy dissipating system, is it the origin of life on Earth, or is it how do you know how closely you got to the actual chemical origin of life?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the problem. This happened 4 billion years ago. I never think we're going to be able to know exactly what happened. Furthermore, you don't even know that there might have been multiple parallel origins of life that one kind of took over, and there are kind of like lost biochemistries that existed 4 billion years ago that don't exist now, and maybe you kind of found one of those origins that might have existed. I don't know who said this, but I agree with it. I'm not looking for necessarily the origin of life. I'm looking for an origin of life. I think let's start there. And and I don't think that anyone's going to be able to prove if there isn't an origin, which would be huge in itself, making life from scratch. I don't think that necessarily people are going to be able to prove that that's exactly what happened. And I don't think it's terribly important. I think that kind of what I'm happy with, and I think would be a significant contribution, is if we start understanding, let's even not even say necessarily understanding, because how do you even know that you've done that? I'm saying, how do you try to understand? How do you start understanding what the pieces that might have gone into the puzzle and what may or may not have been important? And then we're kind of trying to get some colors onto the palette, and then people could start painting with those. But the understanding, I think, of life itself, we don't even have a good definition for what life is. Any definition that you come up with for life has a flaw. I mean, people say, oh, it's a self-replicating system capable, that can undergo Darwinian evolution. Well, the counterexample to that is a mule. A mule is sterile. It can't reproduce. Would anyone look at a mule and say it's not living? Well, all of a sudden, there goes your definition. And yeah, people can really get deep into the weeds on this. I think that, and I don't plan to right now. I'm just saying that we don't have a good understanding of what's going on.
Sure. Well, we'll leave it there then. Can you tell me about your teaching activities?
Yeah, so I teach organic chemistry at SLU for the most part, and especially to our major students, so our majors in chemistry, biochemistry, and chemical biology. I've taught classes there as probably as small as 25 for the majors, and then occasionally I'll teach the non-majors, which for me, the record was 326 in the same room. So I tried to give them, I had a very good high school, I had very good teachers throughout in chemistry throughout my career, but particularly in high school. And I try to bring what he brought to me, which is a lot of explanations, focusing on orbitals. A lot of my questions have answers that are more essay-like and explanation-like than they are multiple choice or other things like that. And, try to hold them to a rigorous standard while having fun at the same time.
So do you attribute your interest in chemistry to your high school teacher? I mean, you could have done a lot of things.
Absolutely. I had a pretty privileged childhood. I grew up in Northern Virginia in Fairfax County, which is has one of the greatest school systems and has a high school, a magnet school, Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, that regularly makes like the #1 public high school list. We had technology labs. 10th grade, the chemistry teacher would pick out the best students from biology freshman year and invite them, the top 30 in the school, to take an intensive 2-year AP chemistry program. And I did that. And I had no idea that I wanted to do chemistry until then. I think pretty much ever since I guess I would have been 15 at the time, ever since about October of the year that I was 15, like 2 months into the year, I was certain that I wanted to be a chemist and do chemical research, and nothing has changed. Nothing has changed since then.
That's awesome. So in your own class, I think what everybody is wondering is if Jean-Luc Picard were a student in your organic class, would he have failed it as he did at Starfleet Academy?
Yeah, I pulled that clip and I show that to my students regularly. That Jean-Luc Picard told Wesley that he failed organic chemistry at the academy. I think that I don't know.
But you know how to find a good student. When they come through your class, you would have identified him as a future leader in Starfleet.
I think I try to establish a rapport with all of my students so much as they'll let me. I think Picard admitted though that he was distracted by other activities that perhaps hormone induced that at the time. And sometimes you lose students and you can't get them back.
Awesome. All right. Where did ChemBark get its name?
It got its name where you sat. Just a year, I think, before you occupied the chair that you did behind me. I messed around on the internet, I'd say, like, as most people do. There was a website called Fark, which is still around, but it's kind of like, it's not Reddit, but it was like Reddit before Reddit, and there were comment threads and things like that. And there was really nothing that I found that was dedicated to chemistry discussion, though. And, it found its way on occasional websites and things like that, and friends and I would discuss things and instant message and whatever. When I went to go get a domain that was going to be dedicated to a chemistry blog and to co-write with Brooks, the person who was at your desk before you and sat behind me and is a good friend, I came up with a couple of names. I think there were 3, and I said I was bouncing them off Brooks to see. I think one of them was Chemagination, and I don't know what. I think I might have that domain, but I'm not sure.
But no fricative consonants, though.
Yeah. And then the other one was ChemBark, which was going to be like what I was focusing on was not necessarily the bark part. It was the M-bark. So I wanted it to have chem or start with chem. And then the question is, what do you do with that like M part? And so Chemagination, that's kind of a perversion. And then ChemBark as M-bark. And then that's where it came from. Brooks just said, ChemBark, I like it. And from there, it then started to, the dog aspect of it and the barking aspect of it is kind of what took off. But it didn't start out like that.
How do you think people found out about it?
Well, I had my own personal blog called Endless Frontier before that, which was a mess of a lot of stuff. It was a mess of like me talking about fantasy football and me talking about soccer and the World Cup that happened in 2006. And, it was anything that I was interested in. Chemistry was on there too. And I said, I got to I can't have it like mixed with this other garbage. So I spun that off there. And so people knew from chemistry posts that I'd written on Endless Frontier about that I was talking about chemistry. I was talking particularly about the Dalibor-Samish case, the Ben-Guses and Dalibor-Samish research misconduct. And I think when that story broke, people were really looking for a place for information and to discuss it, because the American Chemical Society, CNE News, JACS, they had been sitting on it and they weren't talking about it at all. And that's kind of where the initial audience came from, which is probably smaller than most people would think. I don't think that it was maybe more than, even at the height of it, like a couple thousand page views a day related to that story.
That's pretty good. I mean, if you consider, interactions with various Twitter posts, even if somebody has 1,000 followers, they're happy to get, 200 views or something.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to get views or to get like an opinion out there today, though, with Twitter. Like, the audience is bigger. I would think that audience for the blog was really laser focused on organic chemistry and organic synthesis for the most part. So I think that I know that there were a lot of people who were big names in the field who were looking at that, who were lurking, and there was discussion there and anonymous commentary and all that. And yeah.
Did you ever think that it would adversely affect your career? I mean, you must have, but how? To what extent?
I mean, I was told that there's a particular organic professor at Harvard who did not like the blog and said to me as much. And I politely said, I understand. And
that was pretty polite. I understand is pretty polite.
Thank you for your opinion. And I would like to engage people more and say, well, why do you think that? Because of really where it came from too, is that these discussions happen all the time. They're at the water coolers within groups. I came from an organic background, and then going into George's lab, I don't know what we did in that lab, but it was only a fraction organic chemistry at any given time. So there really weren't people around, too many, to talk about this stuff with. This kind of opened it up, and I think it's a lot more fair and democratic to have these conversations in public than to just do it around the water cooler. And this is by the time I changed a lot when I was a grad student, and I think my writing changed. Not by the time ChemBark came along, I think I was a lot more mature. Sometimes I go back to emails and I go back to other things that I'd written, and I'm really super ashamed of some of the stuff that I wrote when I was younger. Even back. Go ahead.
So I think what was interesting to me about the blog, I actually had forgotten the history. Like, I didn't remember the Columbia retractions happening right at the beginning. I guess they of the blog. I guess they did. But I remember. I think that some people could have done the blog a lot sloppier than you did. I mean, I thought you had really high. You had a really high quality of writing and style of argumentation, and clearly an interest in journalism that I think came through. And I think it if it were handled by many other people, it would not have been so competently handled. And that's what I would attribute the success to. I think your writing style, your ability to form an argument, I think that was a key to ChemBark's success. And I wanted to ask you first, did you have an interest in journalism, and where did your interest in writing come from?
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoy debate. I enjoy arguing. I enjoy, forming strong arguments and having to defend positions, and also trying to generate ideas and defend why they should be tested. I think that's a hallmark of science. Why don't we bring it into the social aspects of our field as well? Why do we just accept things the way they are? Organic chemistry has been taught the same way for 30 years, with some exception now with active learning. Is this the way we do it? But what you see, I will agree. When I read anything that's on ChemBark, for the most part, I'm proud of it. Even going back, and this is hard to do sometimes. You could go back to things that you've written, when you're a grad student. You're like, oh my goodness, what is this garbage? Especially
even a grant proposal I wrote last year, I think it's junk.
Yeah, like when you're starting out something new. And I guess the point was that ChemBark wasn't something new. It was something I was doing already. But I've had that moment too. And I've had embarrassing things, things that when I came to grad school, um, I really loved chemistry. And the first year of grad school was a shock. And I think that the conversation on Twitter now is about toxicity of the organic environment. And I will admit, I was a toxic person. I bought into the machismo of, shaming people who walked out the door at 6 p.m. because it was too early, shaming people who participated in the Quality of Life Committee at Harvard, shaming people who got opportunities that maybe not shaming them, but like there was always conversation about questioning what right does this person have to this? Oh, it must be because of something else. They're someone's favorite, or it was something to do with diversity, and that's why they got something.
Yeah, there's a lot of insecurity at 21, 22.
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, I like to look at myself as I was an adult by then, granted a young adult, but I want to go back to that person, just smack him. And things like in high school, using the word, I had a fantasy football team talking about that blog that was named the Cambridge Retards. And, in public, I made fun of things for being gay. And this was something that I think that came out of, really what I would like to do is go back to the person, and say, you are only saying this stuff and thinking it because of you've grown up in a bubble, in a privileged bubble, and you need to realize that when you say these things and when you think these things, you're hurting people, and you're never going to realize it because of these people are hiding some things, potentially hiding from you, not opening up, and I think that maybe by my third or fourth year in grad school, I became a little bit more mature and started thinking about things more clearly. I think another thing that helped was making sure that the blog was under my name, and that anything that I wrote on the blog was signed. I never left an anonymous comment on the blog on ChemBark. I never posted something without signing my name to it, so that it was that I had to be willing to be held accountable for the stories that I was reporting journalistically, for the commentary that I was offering. I let other people comment anonymously, which I took more of their brunt than anyone. Basically, I let people be anonymous to do nothing but just beat me over the head with stuff.
If I were you during this time, I mean, you took such abuse on various things that you wrote, or that, and most of it being unjustified, that it would have consumed my mental bandwidth to like 10% of capacity. I would, if I were you during those years, I would have 10% of my capacity to think about my research and classes and TAing. Frankly, I don't know how you were able to compartmentalize, if you were actually able to.
I mean, it's one of those things, I think, where I'm constantly, even now, like driving home, when you're just sitting somewhere, feeding your kids like a bottle or something like that, you're thinking, you're mulling over an idea. And that would happen. Like you're at the hood. I was at the hood. I mean, you're running a column, which is kind of often a mindless activity. And you're like, so you're weighing that down. I tend not to care too much about people's criticism, especially people that I don't know, unless they're going to launch an argument that is backed up. Like if someone just lobs abuse and is going to, do things like, oh, you should be, why are you still there? Why aren't you more productive? Whatever. They don't know anything about what's going on that I haven't shared. And for the most part, I did not share too many things about my work in the lab and about my situation in the lab. So, they're working from a deficit of data. The discussion, I tried to focus on the facts at hand, and a lot of times I'd be responsible for bringing out those facts, and then keeping it on point to the discussions. If someone wants to come in there and lob grenades about me, cool. I'm going to sit there and be like, okay.
Yeah, almost all of
You
which
know,
were
whatever.
anonymous. And this time in the mid late aughts was the time when the internet was transitioning from the early days when you had internet relay chat and 100% of people were anonymous to now Facebook and Twitter, where anonymity is much harder to achieve, and people generally don't want anonymity because of, in part, the exposure and the danger of signing your name to virtually everything.
Yeah, and I think that the discussions, as much as people hate uh, some of the tone of discussions on Facebook and Twitter, I think that in chemistry they're much better than when you had anonymous commenters on blogs and that people had that cloak of anonymity, which again I was happy to grant because of, for every 10 people that were lobbying abuse, there was one person who actually legitimately felt scared about voicing an opinion, and they could come and voice that opinion. And I never outed, I never tried to figure out who someone was with the intent of unmasking them. I never did that, even for the people abusing me. I never revealed the source of a story that didn't want to be revealed. And I stand by that today. I will not reveal those sources from that. I will not try to unmask people. And I bring this to my classes too. For all of my classes, we have a discussion board where there's a feature where you could sign your name, but you could also click something which makes you anonymous and it doesn't log your IP, and I can't see you. So if you want to ask a question, or if you want to say, Paul, you're doing this wrong. This is unfair. That question was unfair. Whatever. We can have a discussion that focuses on that thing, that aspect that doesn't make the student feel that we're going to go after them. And in the class when we had 326 students, there were some people who took advantage of that anonymous feature, and we had some really good discussions about how hard it is to run an organic chemistry class, and how, if there's an error on a problem, how do you deal with that fairly. And it's to think about the mechanics of running a class like that in such detail that you have to defend yourself to anonymous criticism really forces you to be thoughtful about what you're doing.
Absolutely. And there are aspects of remote teaching and platforms such as Zoom, which I wish we could import into live lecturing. For example, the ability to private message the professor during the class. Because, when I was a student, I didn't, always want to raise my hand. I didn't want to look dumb, ask a dumb question. But now it sort of is built into the system and can be done so seamlessly. And I think it supports inclusive teaching and neurodiversity and people who don't want to be the 5 students in class who raise their hands seemingly, every time a question is asked.
Yeah, I agree. My thought with a lot of teaching stuff is that to try to allow students to consume the material in any way that's comfortable to them. Like if I could, a lot of what I've done, spending time doing, is just coming up with a new approach. So there are books on reserve at the library, like a collection of like 12 Orgo textbooks. There are videos, there are old exams, there are office hours, there's more stuff to do than can be done in 24 hours. You're going to get to pick what works best for you. And I think that, yeah, we've just introduced this whole, not that people weren't doing it before, but with remote teaching, there are videos of things, there are features like chats, and it's just a whole new level of, variety that people could choose what works best for them. That's not to say that it isn't exhausting to provide all of these things, but it is, yeah, like you said, I think that there's a big aspect of inclusion there, and letting people kind of engage you in a way that they're comfortable.
And it's a really good time to be a freshman or a sophomore, somebody taking an intro class, because of all the good content out there. I mean, your chemistry professor may not have the best explanation of van der Waals equation of state. They and you can find it on YouTube. And I actually, will encourage my students to search broadly if they're not happy with my explanation or the TA's explanation. There's a lot of material out there. What I wanted to ask you about next was the future of undergraduate education in the time of a pandemic, and what is it exposing about us, if anything, and how do you see things?
I don't know if it's telling me. I don't know if that's what I worry about with education. I think one thing that the pandemic has exposed, or is kind of pushing to the forefront a little bit. It's kind of hard to push things to the forefront when you have a pandemic, because kind of like the specter of death is always in front of you. But the question of what is the value of a college education, and how much we're paying for tuition, and people saying, like, are we paying for professors to be in front of us face to face and to have office hour interactions where they're kind of leading us and to serve as mentors, things like that. And if we're delivering something exclusively by video, should there be a discount? And what should that discount be? And there are lawsuits about this, like NYU, Harvard has issues like this, and who knows when those things are going to be adjudicated. But I worry, the things I worry about it is not so much the instruction. I feel very comfortable with the type of instruction that I give, and I'm a traditionalist. And I think that what I love more than anything is to have small groups and be able to ask someone a question, see where try to get inside their head, and then try to push them over that next edge, and then go one thing at a time. It's a lot harder to do online than it is in person, and I lament that.
And it blows up the active learning methodology. So you mentioned you were a traditionalist, which I assume means like lecturing in a class.
I like to be the center of attention, Darren.
So, yes. Speaking, when your graduate advisor, when George found out about ChemBark, how did? Is that a story, or like? Because I remember during your exit when we had like a party for all the exiting lab members, and the buffet for your exit, which was I think was pyramids of McDonald's burgers. And George, his normal joke was to come in, point to the buffet, and say, "I've been cooking all day." And he did not say that conspicuously for yours. So anyway, that was the first time I learned that George knew about ChemBark. But was that a story when that was revealed to you?
First of all, I should say that I was in George's lab for a long time. 7 years in grad school. The problem was, one of the issues, I did not plan on staying there that long, and I think it was kind of unnecessary, was that I did not have a close relationship with George. There were times where I would request a meeting, and there was a time where, from the time I requested a meeting to the time that I actually got to meet with him for 1 hour, was 8 months. It got bumped off his calendar 3 times, and it wasn't like I got the next slot. It was like I got the next available slot. But anyway, George opens the meeting. "I think you spend too much time blogging." And I said, "Oh, how much time do you think I spend blogging?" And he said, "I don't know." And I said, "If you don't know how much time I spend blogging, how could it possibly be too much?" And he paused, and it seemed like forever, but it was probably about 3 seconds. And then he started talking about research. He didn't say anything else about it ever again.
I remember that even by the time I rotated in the group, your relationship had already become pretty fraught, and that was pretty apparent, but you didn't actively try to dissuade me from joining the group, even if you did tell me that you regarded your decision as a mistake. Ultimately, I had an experience that I don't think I could have replicated in any other lab, even if it didn't start out that way.
here's what my advice was by the time I left the group, is that this group works on a lot of fun problems and hard problems. And if there's nothing here that interests you, something is incredibly wrong with you, the student, because we work on anything and everything, from electronics to biology to organic chemistry to origins of life to flame, whatever. There is something here that interests you, and there's probably something here that has really sparked your imagination. But there's a certain arrogance associated with a lot of people at Harvard, where you finished at the top of your class, you work hard. There is no problem where you look at and say, I cannot work my way through this problem. And I think people, and if it were me, I'd probably feel the same way if I were a first-year student, to hear this advice and go, look, this is a jaded person. I'm going to come in here, I'm going to work my ass off, and I'm smart, and I'm going to be in the third that he pays attention to and loves and benefit from it.
This is amazingly consistent of you, by the way. This is almost verbatim what I remember now that you're telling me again. And I agree with it. Like I did think, that's a jaded fourth-year grad student telling me this. I'm gonna do it my own way.
And I would too. I mean, that's the what can you do? I mean, that's part of youth. And I don't even think that I'd necessarily take the advice now. I think that if I ran it over, that I could do it differently. If I could come up with one governmental regulation that would maybe help prevent some of this, I think that for any grad student or postdoc you're advising, there has to be a dedication of like FTE, of like full-time equivalents for that, and your FTEs cannot add up to 1. So I think, they can't add up above 1. Like, I think there has to be a limit to the size of how big a lab can grow before you have to bring in other people who are designated as PIs or sub-PIs to help manage things.
Like famously the Langer lab.
Yep, Bob Langer has a huge lab, but he has lieutenants. I don't mean that as a disparaging term, but he has people who, either for the lieutenants or for the senior scientists or for the PI, like there's a level of middle management that allows the trainees and the people doing the work to have more regular feedback and to get more mentorship.
Do you have an idea then for what the fractional FTE per graduate student should be?
I have a hard time justifying a lab getting bigger than 12 grad students and postdocs.
Yeah.
Without like middle management.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's almost like if the group is too small, you miss the emergent phenomena that occur as a result of people interacting with each other and generating ideas, but it really becomes difficult to manage after 8, and basically impossible after 10 or 12.
The fact of the matter is that these are the prime years of human life in people's 20s. With that said, I will say that there are things that I learned from George that I cherish to this day. I do like his outline system, and I think it works if used properly. Also, I never would have been exposed to the origins of life as a research problem if it weren't for being in his lab. And I find that fascinating. I came to George's lab because I saw him give a talk my freshman year of college. I was at NYU. I took the train up to Columbia where he was giving the Falk plot lectures. And he had one that was on self-assembly at the mesoscale, like these pieces of plastic that were coated with hydrophobic surfaces and assembled in, depending on how each individual piece was painted, there was emergent behavior of like assembling into large structures. And he said at the end of it, what we're trying to do is establish the rules for self-assembly so that we could bring this down to understanding it on the molecular level. And ever since I was a freshman at college, I wanted to join that lab because I wanted to do that. It's like they're understanding the rules now, then we're going to scale it down. Of course, I get to the lab and they're not doing that. And the reason why they're not doing that It's because you can't do that. The rules on the mesoscale have nothing to do with the rules that go on the molecular scale. It doesn't work. So I had to pick something else. It came along that the Harvard Origins Initiative was starting, and George was involved in that, and I think that's a good break. So that was a good break for me. That was a lucky break because I find this problem so fascinating and important. And I wouldn't have had the opportunity to work on it at practically any other big graduate school because there aren't people who do origins of life chemistry.
And especially not ones that have the kind of diverse funding portfolio that allow students to work on projects that don't really have a program within NSF, certainly not NIH, certainly not DoD, specifically for this kind of discovery, like pure discovery oriented chemical research. So it actually does take some kind of threshold of a group and its funding structure that can even support work like that.
Yeah, and fortunately now I'm a member of the NSF Center for Chemical Evolution, which is like a big center dedicated to the origin life, and that's been fantastic. And NASA does support a lot of this research too. But it's one of those things that I think we've talked about this in the past. It's surprising that you don't see more people engaged in this problem in chemistry departments at big schools because of the origin life is a chemical problem. Physics is too abstract to get anywhere, and by the time you get to biology, the problem's already solved. Chemistry's in the middle. I would think that more chemists would be involved in this.
Yeah. So here's a question that could potentially help some younger scientists. What do you do when you're applying for your postdoc or your next position if you're not sure you can get a letter from your graduate advisor?
A lot of things are about who you know. And my undergrad advisor, who I was very close with, David Schuster at NYU, was a photochemist, knew Harry Gray, and we all happened to be at a conference in New Orleans in 2008 for the ACS, where we were celebrating the Beckman Foundation. And, this came up in conversation, and it was, you should come, Harry was saying, you should come work for me, and gave me a bunch of fellowships to apply for. So it was never really clear. I just looked at it and say, I need to get a fellowship. And fortunately, the fellowship that I got, which was this NSF ACC fellowship, did not if I recall correctly, I don't think it required letters of recommendation. I think it just required a proposal. And so I think that the sick thing about this was that I am almost certain that I'm one of the few people who benefited from the financial meltdown in 2008. Because of what that meant was there was a stimulus package that multiplied the number of these fellowships that were available. And there are two things that go through my mind is that I don't know why I was picked, but I'm sure it's because there were more fellowships available. And a large part of me believes that it's because I'm disabled, physically disabled, that there's a checkbox on these things, and maybe they just said we need to give a disabled guy a break. These are the things that go through my mind. And for whatever reason, I got that fellowship and then got to go to Harry's lab. And
why did you mostly stop blogging?
Why did I stop blogging? It was that meeting. That meeting that we had whenever it was.
No, I mean in 2013 or so.
Oh, okay. So first, there were two periods of stopping blogging. One of them was after that meeting. Then I picked it up again when I went to Caltech. And it's kind of when I got settled in there, I figured this is something that I want to get back to, reestablish kind of this work. There were some hot button issues that came up, like the arsenic life paper that was published in Science. The Bengü-Cézanne investigation was coming to a head, and I FOIA'd the documents for those. And then just some more observations kind of that had been building up. I have, even to this day, I have folder on my desktop of my computer, which has about 100 unfinished blog posts, like literally about different topics, which I just don't think they're ready to kind of go. And I'm not proud of the writing. And so basically, instead of publishing on the blog, I write stuff on my desktop and just have it sit there and kind of read it and go over it.
So that's, to me, what takes a lot of time is polishing the writing. I mean, there are people like program managers I'll send an email to and spend for freaking ever to write it.
Yeah, I mean, it's associated with your name, and it's I always have gone with the hold on to papers longer and make sure. I really value quality over quantity, and I know that can be a curse, and I recognize that. But that is my main vice: is I insist on high quality, and my output will be lower because of that. And that's just the way I am, and I can do nothing but apologize for it. I've tried to fix this, and I just can't. I probably need to go to some therapy or something, to work on this and become a better person, because I recognize that this can have negative impact, not just for me, but for like students who would like to get papers out earlier and can use them to kind of like get fellowships and jobs and things like that. But the why I stopped kind of when I had this job was that the difference between how busy you are when you are a grad student and a postdoc and when you're a PI it's a whole new level. And people are relying on you more. And I just couldn't deal with not just the writing, but when you're writing the blog, you have to manage the comments. You have to respond to discussion. You can't just let it sit there because it's gonna run amok. And I just couldn't do that as well as I did before. And
especially now, yeah. I think we're actually missing your voice in a few important topics, because there are some issues in chemistry that have rose to prominence lately, but I understand that that you need a lot of bandwidth to curate the comment section. I don't mean block people, but respond to them.
Yeah, and also just like when you're a grad student or a postdoc, there are holes in your schedule where you're kind of just waiting for stuff to happen, and everything that you do is usually going to go somewhere. It's like you're not. I know there are experiments that don't make it to papers and things like that, but when you're a PI, like you're writing grants sometimes that are just they don't hit, but you just wrote 100-page document and budgeted and whatever, and then you don't get it. And the only way to deal with this is that you have to do multiples of these things and hope that one of them hit. And also you have to advise, people are waiting on you. There's always something productive to be done. And I find that as I've gotten older, like when I was in grad school, I could sleep for 4 hours a night and I was fine. College, grad school, that was the norm. As I've gotten older, I can't do that anymore. I need 7 hours at least. And that takes away capacity. And
with the lack of structure imposed by having 3 small kids.
Yeah, we have twins right now, and we have a 3-year-old. They, and I got married the year that I started my job, and it's not cool to spend the night in the lab when when you're married and other people want to interact with you, and you have responsibilities at home. So it just everything kind of crushes there. And honestly, a lot of the writing that I did went into teaching, and of course, so I'm writing here and grants and teaching stuff, and no one ever sees that except the people who are on the other end of it. It's not put on the blog. Mm-hmm. But like I said, there are discussion boards for the class, there are office hours and whatever. So anyway, that's what happened at 2013. And I, occasionally will come back and post something. There'll be like a Nobel post, or something will happen, just like, recently with the Hutlicky stuff and the just the work hour discussion, the Carrera appointment to Jax, that I'll come back, and it's not that I don't have views, it's that the I don't want to deal with it
Yeah,
so much.
and you might only have 500 good words in you a day, and you have to be strategic on where you're going to put them. Is there anything you wish I'd asked you but didn't?
No, I think we could spend, like you said, a whole 10 podcasts talking about some of the other issues, but it's been fun to wind through that history, see how knowing that you wanted to talk a little bit about the blog, and I kind of went back and looked at kind of the progression of that, looked at some of the old posts, and it's amazing to see how you change over time and grow and hopefully get better. And you could be ashamed at looking back at what happened in certain ways and wish that you had done it differently and apologize for that. But overall, I think that it's a body of work that stands for itself, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the changes that it made to the ways that some journals do things, the ways that CNE News changed because of kind of how the blog was covering stuff, and I'm going to continue to, as much as I can, hold the people who are in charge of our field to account for the practices of the way they run things. And I hope that there are generations of future grad students who feel empowered to do the same, because of, I think that we need to hear from younger voices and more diverse voices than we're typically used to hearing. And I know it's a scary thing to criticize people who are in power in this field, but it's something that needs to happen. Otherwise, nothing's going to change. And I think that a lot of us could admit that there are some things in our field that need to be improved.
Agreed, Paul. Thank you so much for your views. We'll see you around the internet. Take care.